He's sharpening his pen once again, and the whispers say the next edition could shake the public conversation all over again. This time, the focus isn't just on Prince Harry, but on the narrative surrounding Meghan Markle herself. The murmurs didn't start loudly. In fact, they began quietly, weeks before Meghan's birthday, barely noticeable at first. But everything changed the moment she shared her carefully curated celebration photos. They were elegant, glossy, and clearly meant to project confidence, style, and that familiar Hollywood polish. Instead of admiration, however, the reaction online shifted fast. People began comparing images, revisiting old appearances, zooming in, debating timelines, and asking questions. What started as casual chatter quickly turned into intense speculation. Commentators online suggested that something didn't quite add up, not in a dramatic way at first, but enough to spark curiosity. Some questioned whether her public age aligned with past interviews or early career milestones. Others resurfaced old acting profiles and public records, not as proof, but as points of discussion. For most observers, it was just another fleeting internet debate, until one name entered the conversation and changed everything. Tom Bower, known for his deep investigative work and uncompromising approach to high-profile figures, Bower's reputation alone was enough to elevate the story. Reports began circulating that he had been quietly reviewing background material for months. According to media insiders, he believed there were inconsistencies worth examining, not to make sensational claims, but to question how public narratives are built. The moment his name surfaced, the discussion moved from social media threads to mainstream commentary. Suddenly, analysts were talking. Pundits weighed in. Online discussions intensified. Some people scrutinized recent photos and compared them with appearances from years earlier, while others argued that stress, lighting, and life experience naturally change how someone looks over time. Even those defending Meghan admitted the renewed attention came at an unfortunate moment. Journalists familiar with Bower's work reminded audiences that he rarely speaks casually. They described him as methodical, precise, and relentless when examining timelines and documentation. When he raises questions, they said it's usually because something caught his attention. Still, nothing had been confirmed. Meghan's team offered no response, and that silence only amplified the discussion. Supporters viewed it as dignity. Critics viewed it as avoidance. Media outlets debated both interpretations endlessly. Some commentators emphasized that age adjustments have long existed in entertainment industries and don't automatically imply deception. Others argued that transparency matters more when someone's public image has been built on authenticity. Behind the scenes, reports suggested that Meghan felt overwhelmed by the renewed scrutiny. Those close to her reportedly viewed the speculation as invasive and unfair, pointing out that public figures, especially women, are often examined more harshly than their male counterparts. At the same time, journalists covering the story stressed that Bower's interest appeared focused on documentation and narrative consistency rather than personal attacks. As the discussion grew, royal analysts began framing the situation differently. They suggested that the real issue wasn't numbers or dates, but trust. When public figures carefully manage their image, even minor discrepancies can invite outsized attention. Whether justified or not, perception drives conversation, and conversation shapes reputation. The media cycle continued to churn. Clips resurfaced. Old interviews were replayed. Commentary shows dissected every detail. Yet nothing definitive emerged. No confirmation. No correction. Just speculation layered on speculation. And in that vacuum, the story took on a life of its own. Tom Bower, for his part, maintained his characteristic restraint. He didn't make direct claims. He didn't issue accusations. He simply pointed to inconsistencies and invited interpretation. That approach, subtle and measured, proved more powerful than bold statements ever could. It turned a biographical question into a cultural moment. By the time the discussion reached its peak, one thing had become clear. This was no longer about a date on a document. It was about how narratives are shaped, how silence is interpreted, and how public fascination can transform uncertainty into obsession. A columnist summed it up best by saying that the real story wasn't about age at all, but about the world's fixation on identity and image. For royal empire, this moment highlights something larger than any individual figure. It shows how quickly perception can shift, how powerful curiosity can be, and how modern fame turns even the smallest question into a global discussion. Whether the speculation fades or resurfaces again, one thing is certain. The conversation isn't ending because it was never just about the facts. It was about the story people believe they're being told. Commentators began asking not what was true, but why the question resonated so deeply. Why did this particular speculation grip the public so tightly? Some analysts suggested it tapped into a larger frustration surrounding celebrity narratives. The feeling that everything presented to the public is carefully staged, polished, and filtered. Others argued it reflected society's complicated relationship with age, especially when it comes to women who operate in both Hollywood and elite social circles. As the discussion intensified, attention shifted away from documents and toward behavior. Viewers replayed interviews, not to find answers, but to search for tone, pauses, expressions, anything that could be interpreted as hesitation or calculation. Ordinary moments were elevated into evidence, not because they proved anything, but because audiences wanted them to mean something. Meanwhile, defenders pushed back strongly. They pointed out how often public figures are expected to explain themselves over issues that would never be questioned in private citizens. They argued that no one should be required to account for every inconsistency created by decades of media coverage, outdated databases, or industry practices. To them, the speculation said more about public obsession than about Meghan herself. Still, the momentum didn't slow. Online creators produced long-form breakdowns, mapping timelines, comparing headlines, and speculating about motivations. Some framed the story as a lesson in branding. Others framed it as a warning about how quickly curiosity can turn into fixation. And through it all, Meghan remained silent, a choice that divided opinion more than any statement ever could. Tom Bauer, once again, stayed just on the edge of the spotlight. He neither escalated nor retreated. Instead, he allowed the conversation to orbit his work without fully entering it. To his supporters, this reinforced his credibility. To his critics, it felt calculated. But regardless of perspective, one fact remained undeniable. He had successfully reframed the narrative, turning biography into mystery. Royal watchers began to speculate whether this scrutiny echoed earlier tensions behind palace walls. They questioned whether background checks, briefings, and internal reviews had once examined similar details long before the public ever noticed. No proof was offered. No confirmation surfaced, but the idea alone was enough to keep the discussion alive. At this point, the story stopped being about Meghan as an individual and became about control. Who controls the story of a public figure? The subject themselves, the media, or the audience consuming it? Every theory, every panel discussion, every trending clip added another layer to that question. Some voices urged the public to move on, calling the speculation unnecessary and distracting. Others insisted that public figures benefit from transparency and therefore invite scrutiny. Between those positions sat millions of listeners, not certain what to believe, but unwilling to stop listening. For royal empire, this moment reveals something essential about modern fame. Silence is no longer neutral. It's interpreted. Every non-response becomes part of the story. And once speculation fills the space where clarity could exist, it becomes nearly impossible to reverse. As the headlines slowly began to shift toward new topics, the questions still lingered beneath the surface. Not loudly, not urgently, but persistently. Because unresolved stories don't end, they wait. And whether this chapter ever receives a definitive answer or quietly fades into media history, it has already achieved something lasting. It exposed how easily perception becomes reality, how curiosity becomes conviction, and how a single unanswered question can echo far longer than any statement ever could. This wasn't just another royal conversation. It was a reflection of the world watching, interpreting, and deciding for itself what it believes.